In this section we're going to be talking about concepts and theories. It's a little bit longer than the last two clips. As you can see, we've got a lot of things to talk about. Okay, let's start with the concept of balance. As far back as in 1998 I wrote about balance, and I said, all things being equal and independent of any specificity demands, the selection of exercises should show balance throughout the body. Very clearly worded statement. 7 years later, published under the copyright of another inverted commas author, all things being equal and independent of any specificity demands, the selection of exercises should show balance throughout the body. Another 4 years later, which is 11 years after I first published it, the same author and the co-author chose to publish and claim copyright on the following. All things being equal and independent of any specificity demands, the selection of exercises should show balance throughout the body. That was repeated twice in the 2009 publication. And in the same year, it appeared in writing in a seminar handout. Verbatim. So I talked about balance a lot in 1998 in the How to Write book. And I said it's important to show balance throughout the body. For every upper body there's to be a lower body exercise. For every pushing movement there should be a pulling movement, etc., etc. And I said that if you didn't have balance you'd create injury potential. In particular, I often wrote about the horizontal pushing and pulling, horizontal pushing and pulling, or pulling and pushing. And in 2000, that was in 99, and in 2000 I also spoke about the importance of balance of physical qualities. Not just of strength training, but between the physical qualities. In 2003 I spoke more in the Ask the Master book about horizontal pushing and horizontal pulling and the importance of balancing these to avoid injuries. And I also spoke in the 2003 book Ask the Master about the balance with their needs in other areas. And I spoke about the physical qualities and how sometimes they're neglected and it's a concern, and that performance limitations can be created. Unbalanced physical preparation can also lead to a higher incidence and severity of injuries, etc. For example, a lack of flexibility training, etc., etc. In 2005, which was 7 years after I first started writing about it back in 98, 7 years later, we have a discussion about the need for balance between motor qualities, that is physical qualities, and balance between movement patterns such as horizontal pushing and pulling, and other examples. Talking about the need to use similar reps, similar loads, etc., etc. Creating imbalances, etc., etc. Sounds familiar? It continued in another publication in 2005, balance, horizontal push, pull, etc., etc., etc. And then again in another article, year unknown, extending on my discussion, repeating my discussion of the need for balance. Along the way I also made clear that every single training program has an imbalance which needs to be counted in subsequent training programs. That every single method will have a negative effect and must be counted. I spoke about how it needed to be counted in subsequent programs. That there would be a prioritisation inherent in every program creating an imbalance, and that imbalance would typically come from sequence, volume and intensity. And then again talking about the need for control, damage control for subsequent programs. Some years later, an author is talking about all programs have a positive and a negative aspect, no matter how well designed or specific. Sounds familiar? Even the most perfectly balanced programs, one exercise has to be performed first, etc., etc. Potential negatives. Injury can create an injury situation. Another article, using a smoke screen. Imbalances in the program through volume, load or sequencing. As long as subsequent training programs address that imbalance. And I said, if you don't address muscle imbalances, injuries are likely to occur. I wrote about that in 98, 99 and onwards. I said if you give adequate priority injury prevention, you may find the need to select circuit exercises to address any muscle imbalances. And I made suggestions about addressing muscle imbalances in subsequent programs and reducing injuries, etc. And 6 years later, we have a discussion in another publication, subject to copyright of that author, inverted commas, about muscle imbalances and injuries. I also spoke about the need not to use the same muscle group or line of movement sequence endlessly, and that goes back to, again, the 1990s. I said never use the same muscle group sequence endlessly because it will reinforce muscle imbalances. Never use the same muscle group sequence endlessly, back in 99, same year, reinforcing inevitable muscle imbalances. I wrote about it again in 2000. Never use the same priority for extended periods, limits adaptation, creates boredom. And 6 years after I first wrote about it, if you continue to follow the same exact movement pattern split for long periods of time, you'll be likely to develop muscle imbalances and risk injury. Okay, let's move on. I also gave a lot of attention to how to reverse the priorities in subsequent workouts. Back in the late 90s, back in 2000, talking about reversing them in subsequent programs. That's the transcript from a discussion in a DVD. And back in the 2000, Foundations of Physical Prep, never use the same priorities extended periods. This limits adaptation and invites boredom. 2002, the more this goes on, the more need for imbalance, the more the imbalance continues. 2003, reversing the prioritization, blah, blah, blah. And then another author talked about it in 2005. If you continue to follow the same exact movement pattern, to avoid this, reverse the movement patterns, reverse the priorities. Reverse the priorities. 2009, 10 years after I wrote about it. Reverse the priorities. And how to change every program or we risk creating further imbalances.